The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. What is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil was also in the middle of the Garden of Eden, alongside the tree of life. Genesis 2:9. This tree of the knowledge of good and evil was to give us the knowledge of good and the knowledge of evil. When God made Adam and Eve, He did not grant them the knowledge of good and evil. They were made to live a life without the knowledge of good and evil, at least during the early stage of their existence. Although this knowledge of good and evil was vital for them to eventually possess, it was not beneficial for them to have it at that early stage of their existence. The reason for this is that if they did not have the knowledge of good and evil, just like children, when they do wrong, it would not offend God since they did it out of ignorance. But if they had the knowledge of good and evil and they did wrong, it would offend God because they would know the difference between good and evil, yet still choose to do wrong. To avoid them offending God and provoking His anger, God deprived them of this knowledge in the meantime. God did this not because He wanted them to be lesser than Himself, but because He loved them and did not want anything that would bring contempt upon them. What is the knowledge of good? And what is the knowledge of evil? The knowledge of good is knowing how a particular act can benefit someone if acted upon. On the other hand, the knowledge of evil is knowing how a particular act can hurt someone if acted upon. The minds of Adam and Eve were like those of children when it came to the knowledge of good and evil. God planned that as they increased and multiplied, eventually some selected people would be chosen to eat from the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. Those people would become teachers and leaders over the rest to teach them right from wrong. This plan is echoed in Isaiah 28:9-10. Who is it that He is trying to teach? To whom is He explaining His message? To children weaned from their milk, to those just taken from the breast? For it is, do this, do that, a rule for this, a rule for that. A little here, a little there. Since Adam and Eve were fresh and new in existence, they were like children just weaned and taken from the breast, who must be led gently, step by step, and little by little. That is why verse 10 says, for it is, do this, do that, a rule for this, a rule for that, a little here, a little there. This is how God would have guided them until He raised up shepherds for them who would have access to the tree of knowledge and be teachers and leaders over the people. This is what Jeremiah 3:15 also referenced. Then I will give you shepherds after my own heart, who will lead you with knowledge and understanding. This is how God planned the whole process to unfold. Notwithstanding, at that early stage, Adam and Eve would have definitely been doing wrong, but it would never be counted as evil against them as long as they did not know good or evil. This is the reason God deprived them of the knowledge, because God does not want to count any wrongs against them. Just like sin is not counted against anyone where there is no law, as recorded in Romans 5:13, the same way offense is not counted against anyone where there is no knowledge of good or evil. Acts 17:30 also echoes this truth. In the time of ignorance, God overlooked. Nevertheless, there is one thing that we must take note of. Although God overlooks the wrong because of ignorance, that does not mean He appreciates or accepts the wrong. God hates wrongdoing. Because God hates wrongdoing, that is why He placed the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden, to be used later in the future to bring the required knowledge that will enable them to know right from wrong and avoid doing wrong. Unfortunately, things did not go exactly as planned. We shall discuss the things that went wrong in the next paragraph.